Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. Donald Trump is considering new military aid to Ukraine, and the discussions on this matter reflect serious disagreements among members of the American president's closest circle. It is important to understand that when we talk about new aid, we are still referring to the same fund that was approved during the presidency of Joseph Biden and voted on in Congress. Now, there is currently no more than approximately $4 billion left remaining in this fund. And thus, we can talk about the very last American arms shipments and deliveries according to the decision of Congress. However, as is known, even regarding these deliveries, there are differing views within the entourage of the President of the United States. And that is precisely why the United States Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, made the decision to effectively freeze aid to Ukraine. Later, Donald Trump would tell the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, that he had not made such a decision. However, it is obvious that the head of the Pentagon would never have taken responsibility for freezing the supplies if he did not know that such a decision would be understood and accepted by Donald Trump himself. And indeed, the President of the United States constantly talks about how supplying weapons to Ukraine is very expensive, and also about how the United States itself is running out of weapon stockpiles needed both to ensure the national security of the United States in the event of conflicts that may break out soon. And when it comes to conflicts in the Middle East, after all, we see that experts are now talking about the possibility of a renewed war between Israel and Iran, amid reports that Iran has managed to retain enriched uranium, and that Iranian officials are in no hurry to reach an agreement with the United States. And let's not forget that the war in the Gaza Strip, despite Donald Trump's optimistic statements, does not yet appear to be over. Against this backdrop, the Russian-Ukrainian war is yet another conflict that requires not only an American political presence, but also American weaponry. And here it will be important that Donald Trump will still consider exerting pressure on Russian President Putin a priority, as Putin is not at all ready to end the Russian-Ukrainian war. Sanctions pressure, which the American president seems ready to announce as early as Monday, or an increase in arms supplies. The amounts we are talking about now, even the exhaustion of almost $4 billion from Biden's package, or $600 million from the package that will be included in the United States National Defense Authorization Act, are by no means the kind of money with which the United States can compete with Russia, which continues to shift its economy onto a war footing and enjoys the support of such allies as Iran or North Korea, behind whom one can clearly see the presence of the People's Republic of China, which is interested in the triumph of Putin's army and in disgrace for the collective West, the obvious adversary of China's geopolitical ambitions. So even if Donald Trump now decides to make use of the remaining fund that his administration inherited from the Biden administration, soon, literally, in just a few months, the President of the United States will have to make a decision regarding, so to speak, real assistance to Ukraine in our confrontation with the Russian Federation during the next phase of the Russian-Ukrainian war. A period that threatens to be no less and perhaps even more exhausting than the previous 3.5 years of the Russian-Ukrainian confrontation. After all, it is obvious that Putin would like to use Donald Trump's term in office to achieve a final victory in the war and to annex the territory of the Ukrainian state to the Russian Federation, to resolve what the Kremlin calls correcting the mistake of 1991 by turning the former Soviet republics into organic parts of Russian state territory. Of course, no one in the West can agree to this. However, without weapons, it is impossible to stop the Russian president, his inner circle, and compatriots infected with the chauvinism. And thus, the most important question arises: what will military aid to Ukraine look like in the coming years of the Russian-Ukrainian war? That is, of course, unless Trump manages to at least get Putin to agree to a ceasefire on the Russian-Ukrainian front in the coming months or years of his time in power. There could be a scheme that has already been used by Biden, the creation of a fund from which weapons will be allocated to Ukraine. By the way, this fund could be part of the so-called minerals agreement, which Trump occasionally mentions as an alternative to America's dependence on mineral supplies from the People's Republic of China. Such supplies, to put it mildly, make it unrealistic to impose 500% tariffs against China if Trump wants to respond seriously to the People's Republic of China purchasing Russian oil. Another fairly realistic option is when NATO countries purchase American weapons and provide them to Ukraine. This is not a new option, but it is currently being pushed by the current administration, confident that such a scheme will allow the United States not only to help Ukraine, but also to profit from its assistance. However, once again, for such a scheme to be approved, the United States must agree that there is enough weaponry in their stockpiles to meet their own interests and to maintain the situation with the wars in the Middle East. And of course, there is also the scheme of increasing investment in the European and Ukrainian military industries, provided, of course, that Ukraine's military enterprises are reliably protected from Russian attacks, the scale of which will increase with each passing year of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And for this, Ukraine needs an effective air defense system. And in order to have an effective air defense system, it is necessary for the United States to agree to supply expensive Patriot batteries and interceptor missiles. For them, everything comes down to the active involvement of the United States in the Russian-Ukrainian war during the upcoming periods of confrontation between Moscow and Kyiv. And it seems that Donald Trump will not be able to avoid this involvement during his time in the Oval Office. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe, follow on social media, and support on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Donatella to help develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature here on YouTube. Wishing you victory and peace. Good luck.